And there it is. Ask the Podcast Coach for May 11th, 2024.
Let's get ready to podcast.
There it is. It's that music. That means it's Saturday morning. It's time for Ask the Podcast Coach, where you get your podcast questions answered live. I'm Dave Jackson from the School of Podcasting.com, and joining me right over there is the one and only Jim Cullison from theaverageguy.tv. Jim, how's it going, buddy?
Greetings, Dave. Happy Saturday morning to you. Happy Mother's Day weekend for those mothers out there. We celebrate you, and thanks for doing what you did. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here today.
No.
So,
no. Well, that whole thing, go ahead.
My favorite tweet was, there was this board of holes, and it went from 1 centimeter to 10 centimeter, and it was over the top of one child's head, and it was like, remember, your mom went through this for you.
Yeah. Yeah, when they go, which is the stronger sex, I'm like, are we really even going to have this conversation? I'm like,
not at all.
No. And they put up with all your shenanigans. I just
it's a miracle they don't kill us. How do children actually, how do we get to adults as humans without our mothers murdering us in the middle of the night?
It's crazy.
My mom should have just taken me out.
Just like, that's enough of that. Yeah, you're done. That's funny. Yeah.
Oh,
but we have, speaking of, we have some, I hate that I can't. It sounds like a boat going by. We have a new awesome supporter. How cool is that? In fact, let me throw her website on the screen. It's the one and only Jody Krangle from, if you want to go to her website, voiceoversandvocals.com. And Jim, you may have heard her if you've ever heard this commercial.
I only accept the best. Fancy feast. Now,
or the NFL.
Want 5 months of spa Sundays? Order NFL Sundays.
Or Pfizer.
Pfizer, America's trusted brand for.
Or Coca-Cola. Holy cow, we're talking big names here.
0 calories, 0 sugar, same great taste.
Or if you want her for a podcast intro.
Welcome to Audio Branding, the hidden gem of marketing. I'm your host, Jody Krangle, and this podcast will discuss.
So there you go. And she does have a podcast. If you go again out to voiceoverandvocals.com, I've been on her show twice. Audio Branding, the hidden gem of marketing. So, Jody, thank you so much for becoming an awesome supporter. If I click on her link here real quick, we can see. I was saying earlier, I'm like, where are the pictures of Jody? And there they are. They're on her podcast page. And she talks all about, using audio as a marketing tool. And it's a great show. And of course, obviously, it's going to sound amazing because, it's got Jody behind it. So
it's Jody. She does sound awesome. She's got a great voice.
You should be an awesome supporter like her by going to askthepodcastcoach.com/awesome. But, there's only one thing that can make the morning better. And that would be a hot cup of Java, I think. So, get that up there, Jim. And of course, that coffee core, the coffee core, it's a new thing. It's a coffee pour, really, that we just listened to.
You're drinking coffee cores. That could be a little.
They might choke on those a little bit. But that's brought to you by our good friend Mark over at podcastbranding.co. How much do I love podcastbranding.co? Well, I'm going to rebrand the Podcast Rodeo Show. And as I do that, who did I order for the artwork? Well, none other than Mark at podcastbranding.co. So it's going to become a podcasting hot seat. But he's done Ask the Podcast Coach. He's done the School of Podcasting. He's done the Podcast Rodeo Show. He makes really pretty artwork. And he does so much more than artwork. If you need a whole website, well, then just go over and talk to Mark, because he's going to sit down with you one-on-one and find out what you need, whether it's artwork, a website, a PDF, or a lead magnet, anything you need to look good. Mark can help you with that. And the beauty of that is by sitting down with him, you kind of tell him what he's looking for. He then comes up with the idea. You're not the marketer. Let him do that. Explain what your show is, and he'll come up with a marketing plan that's going to fit your show. So when you want to look good, because remember, they see you before they hear you, there's only one place to go, and that, of course, is podcastbranding.co.
And of course, big thanks to our good friend Dan Lefebvre over there, based on a true story podcast. This week, the Hindenburg is a bad day for those guys.
It
Band
was.
of Brothers and Operation Finale. Over there now, episode, I should know the episode number. I'm looking on the site right now. It doesn't matter. For May 6th through May 12th. Check it out today, based on a true story podcast.com. And Dan, thanks as always for your sponsorship. We appreciate it.
We do appreciate that. And to start off today, I thought what we would do is if I share my screen, I'm calling this more than a wiki, which to me was very close to, I almost said Wookie the first time. And I'm like, wait, this is
different than more than a feeling. This is more
too. So he says, hello guys, I'm a newbie to the non-listener scene. I didn't realize that podcasting was the non-listener scene. Hopefully you are a listener if you're a podcaster. That's like a jockey that doesn't own a horse. But he says, I'm trying to create my own podcast, but I'm having trouble with my speech and the way I actually want to talk about my topics. I want to do semi-educational comedy episodes on topics that interest me. My first episode is about a specific beetle, and he's not talking Ringo, John, Paul, and George. He's talking about the little creepy crawlers. Because otherwise it'd be a 4, maybe 5 episode show and you're done. So far, my approach for this is basically a wiki reading, but I don't really like that approach. Yeah, I wouldn't either, unless it's very news-oriented and straight. Today, we're going to talk about the beetle, Asparagus, or whatever. I wanted to try something more akin to people like Casual Geographic and Lindsay Nicole, the zoologist. I've never heard of either one of those, but he says, but with my own comedic twist, and in the form of a podcast on which I will sometimes get guests. There's no way a call for review. Oh, he's just saying, look, I'm not asking for a review exchange. I'm not promoting anything. I just thought I'd ask some people more in the podcasting scene about some tips and tricks for a beginner with an obvious goal in mind for their project that lacks certain skills. So when I saw this, I thought, well, you tried something, right? You went over and you read the wiki and you thought, that's not really what I was looking for. Now, the good news is you have a goal, right? The old Stephen Covey, start with the end in mind. So that's good, but you tried and you missed it. And like with my book, that thing went through 5 different edits. And I remember they kept sending me like, here's the next edit. And I'm like, we've already done this twice. Are we not done yet? And then I'd like send it back. Okay, here are a couple things. And then they would send it back. Okay, here's the 4th one. So just because you tried something and it wasn't exactly what you wanted doesn't mean, quit. It just means, you have an idea what it is. For me, when I do a presentation, I put in the facts. Here's this and here's that slide and all that other stuff. And then I just run it in my head over and over and over. And eventually something in my brain will go, oh, you know what? You could make that funny. Or this and that, or here's a fun story you could add there. But I start with like, what do I want to cover? And then you're like, okay, good. This is good content. And then it's from there, you just start tweaking it. John says it's not the skills he's lacking. It's lack of research and really needs to make it his own. Yeah, I think that's a good comment. It's one of those things where I think he just needs to keep at it and practice. I don't know. What do you think, Jim?
As you were reading that question, it kind of reminded me of Bill Nye. When Bill Nye came out with Bill Nye the Science Guy back 25 years ago, whatever it was a fairly not unique, but fairly new way of covering science, right? In the way he did it. He tried to make it fun, and a lot of jump cuts and a lot of, he got kids involved in the video production bit of it. And it was new. And who knew if it was going to be successful? I mean, Hollywood is littered with first-time failures where they went out the gate on something and said, hey, we're going to make it this way. We're going to try this. I mean, there was a bunch of superhero films that came out before kind of the Marvel juggernaut stuff we have today that were terrible. They're just awful, right? And it's you kind of have to go through some of those iterations. I mean, failure is just really, and physician heal thyself on this one. I really need to learn it myself, but failure is just a learning step in the process. It's not the last step. I think a lot of folks think like, oh, I failed, I should never do this. No, you should just do it a different way. If you really want to do it, you should just try a different way, either yourself or the way you do it or whatever. And so we've got to kind of get away from this idea of, well, if I failed, I guess I can't do it. Well, I mean, that's with that kind of attitude, you're
Right.
never going to do it, right? But with saying like, okay, well, that didn't work. And I think this is what you just said, which is, okay, that didn't work. Let me try something different. Let's add this in, or let's learn from it and get better. Let's practice. Maybe there's some things that need to be practiced. Maybe there's just some experience that needs to be had. So you just get better at the craft.
Yeah. Jeff says, I don't fail at something. I tried. It was just an experiment that didn't work. Yeah. You keep going back at it. And, I was watching, I think it was 60 Minutes. It was somebody was interviewing Kevin Hart, and they were talking about his latest special. And he said, how long did it take you to come up with an hour's worth of material? And he said 9 months, because it's one of those where you come up with a story and you think it's funny. And then those guys, he has a whole team that records everything he does. And then they see, oh, he tried this word, or he used this kind of phrasing or whatever. And it got more of a laugh when you did this. So then he'll take that out and do that. But then he'll tweak that maybe a little. They're constantly experimenting until they can figure out what works and what doesn't. And, it's not going to be the first time you record a podcast. It's not going to be the most amazing thing you've ever done. You're just going to get better at it. And I'm hoping he doesn't. It doesn't sound like he's going to quit. He's just kind of like, this isn't what I wanted. Well, okay, what did you want? What did you do? And what's the difference between the two? Randy says failure is feedback, and feedback is the breakfast of champions. So there you go. And there you go. And Liberty Dude is really loving the fact that you, when you do the thumbs up and thumbs down and all the other, I know you had fireworks going on.
It's kind of fun. Although, can I tell a quick story about that?
Sure.
So this week I was doing a live stream of a very important work related report. We worked with the Lumina Foundation to do a bunch of survey work around higher ed. And so it's a big deal. It was important. It was one of those kinds. It was like a suit and tie kind of thing, right? And I'm not the greatest at suit and tie, but okay, it was like a suit and tie thing. It was in Washington, D.C. I was producing it from the the home office here, and the contractor we had purchased, or we had hired. There we go. The contractor we had hired was using a Mac to live stream. I was feeding it into YouTube through StreamYard. We were just grabbing the feed through StreamYard. He was pushing in, going full screen with it. But I didn't think about the gestures that on the Mac. I just didn't think about it. And what I should have given him was an RTMP code out of YouTube and let him do the full production off of this stuff. But when we were setting it up, I asked that question, and the person, the project manager at the time, said, "Oh, no, yeah, StreamYard would be fine." And I was like, "Are you sure? You sure you don't want an RTMP code?" I probably should have just set it up that way, and then knowing, because once I gave them the link, they had broadcasted the link out, and they can't just change the link like, oh yeah, because we had 500 or 600 people registered for this kind of thing. So right in the middle of it, so we've got a representative from the Department of Education in Washington, D.C. He's kind of a muckety muck, he's not the guy, but he's a guy.
Yeah.
And he's making a statement, and the thumbs down emoji shows up because he makes some kind of gesture, like he's obviously not going thumbs down. Right?
Yeah.
But like that couldn't be any, and we're not, at Gallup, we're supposed to be not biased and provide equal, right? And then all of a sudden this thumbs down shows up for the Department of Education guy. I was like, that couldn't have been any worse timing to have gestures. So I ping the guy behind the scenes, the guy in DC, and I'm like, "Hey, can you turn off the gestures?" And I get, "Thanks, Apple." That was the. So it was one of those. Talk about failures. I mean, is that a complete failure? Going back to what we're talking about, is that a complete failure?
No,
probably not. He actually, then I asked him, "Do you have a clean feed of this thing?" He's like, "Absolutely. I'm recording this here. If you guys want the clean feed without the gestures that are in it, you can absolutely have that." But this was in that moment, I was just like, how could it have been any worse to get the thumbs down? There, I had seen the thumbs up once before, and I was like, "Oh, okay, I'll just let that go. That's not a big deal." But
Right.
the thumbs down
Yeah,
didn't quite work out.
That's not good. Yeah. Oopsie. Yeah, exactly. Jeff says, I'm actually getting ready to turn on my Apple TV just for this special. He says, Steve Martin's new document on Apple is really good. He shared how hard he tried and all the things he failed at until he hit it big. And the interesting thing, especially if you were around for Steve Martin, was he what? I guess late 70s, early 80s?
Yeah, but he looked, did you notice he had gray hair already in those days? Yeah. I feel like he's been around forever. He was like 17 and he had gray hair.
But my favorite thing is I was watching some documentary on him, and I've read his book. His book is amazing. And he explains that he didn't do it purposely, but he ended up doing comedy with no punchlines. And I'm like, he kind of did. I remember I was all of, I don't know, 11 or 12, or probably when this came out. And he was doing his comedy thing, and he's doing it, and all of a sudden he's like, okay. And he goes, okay, hey, Grandpa bought a rubber. That was it. And me and my friend would cry when we heard, I don't know why we thought it was so, but it's just a phrase you didn't hear put together. And so, and it's weird.
Getting small. What is that? His skit on Getting Small.
You can probably quote half that album, right?
Oh, for sure. And that's 1,000 years ago.
Yeah. Climbed
one
inside
time
the
I got
vacuum.
really small, got inside a vacuum cleaner. I retained the shape of a vacuum cleaner for 3 weeks.
Off. Yeah.
It's just hilarious in the day. Yeah.
Yeah. It's one of those things that it's kind of weird. I actually I did another presentation about this, that one of the things I don't think it's good, but we're so used to having the next thing. Like music right now is so weird. Like I will get a band that I like the Black Crowes came out with an album, a new one. It's the first new music in a while, and it's actually not bad. There's like 4 songs there, but I think I've listened to it 3 times, and I'm kind of like, all right, what else you got? It's just back in the day, I would be sitting there listening with headphones on, reading the liner notes. We just appreciated it more, and I must have listened to Steve Martin's album like 8 million times. George Carlin.
Scandalous. It's a little scandalous. He was clean for the most part, but he referenced some drug stuff. And it was my parents were on. I mean, Nate Benghazi says I had Christian parents, and they were the most Christian. That's what he says, and I definitely had the most Christian parents. And Steve Martin, we weren't even allowed to listen to George Carlin. That was not That was a no.
I still don't understand how, because I think
Richard
I was
Pryor.
Yeah, I think I was 7 when Occupation Fool came out, which had the 7 dirty words, and I remember listening to that in the living room. Like the whole family was listening to it, and they're just kind of like, "Now, don't say those words; those are not for you." And then I remember my brother was listening to Richard Pryor in the basement one day. And I walked in, and he just came over and just shoved me out the door and closed it. He's like, "You can't hear this." And I later went back and listened to that album. I'm like, "Oh, yeah, you're right. I shouldn't be listening to that." But when it comes to Steve Martin, Jeff says he's the reason I started playing the banjo. Yeah.
I'm a rambling man.
Yeah.
RAMBLIN apostrophe rambling.
Well, that and the one thing Steve asked me, "Steve, how can you be so funny?" And he's like, "It's all about timing. And it's like, again, yeah. He is a really good banjo player. So.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure. He played his banjo a lot.
Yeah.
He was kind of in that transition, in that stand-up transition, and probably a pioneer, and probably did some things he was misunderstood for in those days. I mean, to that point, stand-up comedy was more joke kind of,
set up punchline. Yeah.
And he kind of, I don't want to say pioneered, that's maybe giving him too much credit, but he did do a lot of that kind of just goofy, silly, humor that was, and he was, of course, he was very physical humor oriented.
Oh yeah.
You'd see him in person.
The arrow through the head.
Yeah.
He was silly. That was the word. Yeah. He was silly. And in fact, in the documentary, I saw part of it. He said, because he came out like in the late 60s where everything was anti-war and very serious and political. And he's like, I just want to be silly. And that's where, to kind of bring this back to podcasting, so many people look at what somebody's doing that's successful and they're trying to do what they're doing. And in some cases, because everybody else is doing that. And so when you do something different, it makes you stand out. I always point at Adele, and everybody else is singing in their underwear and all their songs sounds the same. If it's, I don't know about you, but every song that is remotely has a just a hint of Latina in it, it's capu, 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 every song.
Yeah.
And it's like, and then I'm like, okay, can we get it at least a different beat? Like, it's just the same thing over and over. And when you zag, when everybody else is zigging, you stand out. And so Adele came out with this amazing voice. She stood there in a dress and sang, and people are like, this is amazing. And I was like, yeah, well, it's different. And so sometimes I think when we try to emulate somebody who's doing really well, it's too late. They've already cornered the market on that. And by the time you get to where they are, they're off to doing something different, or
Can I disagree with you for just a second? And not a hardcore disagreement. Not a hardcore.
I'm sorry. Thank you. Good night. We're done, people.
Good night, everybody.
No, I'm dying to hear it. You know me.
No, I think you're right in the sense that by the time, if you like, when Michael Bublé came out and brought that kind of Frank Sinatra style back, right, with a new twist on it, right, then there were a bunch of copycats, right? And I don't think either are wrong. I think some of us need to be pioneers and we need to try new things, because that's hard. That's actually the hardest form of entertainment, is to do something brand new.
Yeah.
You're going to get naysayers. You don't know if it's going to work. Your chances of failure are large. Just because it's different doesn't mean it's going to be successful. Like, it's hard, and only some of us are built that way. But I do think there is a space for, once that genre has been established, Michael comes out, puts out whatever album he does,
right.
he starts touring. All of a sudden, we start seeing these different voices come that are really basically just doing what he did.
Right.
I think there's a space for that, because I think there's some artistic ability in that. And then sometimes the leader isn't always the best one. Like, sometimes you have somebody who comes out and leads with that, and then you have another person who comes behind and really blows that out, right? Really kind of blows out the thing. So I wouldn't say once, and I know you didn't mean it this way, but once somebody has come out and cornered the market, to use your term, you should not, and if you want to do it that way, you shouldn't. Yeah, you can. I think you can. Now, realize you're going to be in a field of a whole bunch of people, right? That's the drawback to it. You're not the leader on it. So you're now, the challenge is the competition that you're going to have with all these people trying to be, and I shouldn't have used Michael Bublé, because I can't ever say his name. So I should have said something else. But
Michael Bublé.
Think of Bubble, Michael Bubble. So, think of all the Michael Jackson, copycats that came out afterwards. There were some that were successful in that. So I'd hate to see us, we'd have one rock band if we only had, after the Beatles, if we only had the Beatles, we would have had only one rock band.
Right.
And
so Dan brings up a great point. He says Adele was actually inspired by Amy Winehouse. I guess there's a new biopic out on her now. So some might say she didn't start that, which actually, if you know who's the best at this? Apple, right? Microsoft would come out with something, and then Apple would be like, oh, here's the Zune. And people go, ooh. And then I think actually the Zune came out after the iPhone or whatever.
That's a bad one. iPad would be a better example. Microsoft had tablets before. They were PCs. Then the iPad came out and just blew them away.
Yeah.
For sure.
And then, if we go back in time, Amy Winehouse was inspired by Billie Holiday. The Beatles were inspired by Little Richard and Elvis. So, yeah. And that's where I think where it misses is when you're trying to be exactly like that band. That's where you're like, wait, if I wanted to listen to Led Zeppelin, I would listen to Led Zeppelin. But thank you so much for trying Kingdom Come in the 80s. But,
what do they call that when not a tribute band? It's called that, but they have a new name for, like, a band that sounds like the band that's like they're touring, what's the name of that? It's like a tribute, but what are they? Do you know? You know what I'm talking about?
No, that's what I call them, tribute bands.
A tribute band. I just heard a commercial that I've heard my first commercial for a Phil Collins tribute band, whatever.
Okay.
And he's not dead yet. Now he's really close because he is hurting.
He's not in good shape. Yeah, it's a
I
bummer.
saw him before the pandemic and that guy. But yeah, so that you kind of made it. I think you made it when you have these bands come out that are inspired by you. I think it's fine, right? I mean, I think it's fine. It's just I think it's know your space, know what you're doing in that and what you're doing. And if you got a creative spin cover band, no, this is there's in advertising now, there's a term that they use to it was in the commercial there. It's kind of a newish term. Anyway, doesn't matter. Doesn't really matter. Just be you.
Did you hear all the crap that Apple took about their new commercial? I get it. It was weird. So it's called Squish or Squoosh or Smash or something. It's still on YouTube. But what they did is they took all these old icons, like a metronome and a Miss Pac-Man machine, and all these little iconic toys and gadgets and phonographs and stuff, and they have this huge hydraulic press, and it's just squishing down, and you're seeing all these things just get smashed. And then in true Apple fashion, when it gets to the very bottom, colors shoot out the bottom, and when they pull it up, they're like, it's the new iPad, it's thinner than ever, yada, yada, yada. And everybody's kind of like, yeah, but you destroyed my iconic toys. Like they're upset that they smashed them. And I'm like, and then some people go even deeper. They're like, usually Apple is about, creating, and this was about destruction and things like that. And are you trying to throw something on the screen? Is that you?
Yeah, as soon as you're done.
Yeah,
that's
no.
right.
I can do that. So I can do this, and in theory, I can make this. Is that going to work like that? Not really.
I think so. So experience is what I was looking for. The Phil Collins experience. Right?
Yes.
Experience is what and then this guy even looks like Phil Collins, right? He's got really short, balding hair, and he's got the band set up like Phil does. I'm sure it's heavily licensed, right? I'm sure that.
Yeah, if you're using his name. Well, I don't know. There's a lot of bands that, there's like 8 million Kiss tribute bands. And what's kind of sad, I hate in Akron, Ohio, they have a downtown area with a little stage. It's actually really cool. And the only people they hire are cover bands, or not even cover bands. They're, Rumors, Fleetwood Mac Experience. And, the boys are back in town. It's like, really? Like, you're not gonna, because if I was there.
Fleetwood Mac is getting a lot of run right now.
Yeah.
The kids love Fleetwood Mac. That's the crazy. Every once in a while, there are those bands that transcend.
Yeah.
Transcend. That transcend through time. And Fleetwood Mac is one of those that just has, for whatever reason. I mean, my daughter one time was like, that one of their songs came on and she was like, oh, leave that.
Yeah.
And I was looking at like, do you know Fleetwood Mac?
Yeah.
Like, of course they're awesome.
My favorite ever is when I went back to get my teaching degree at the ripe old age of 42, and I have to take the BS classes. So one was like music appreciation or something really stupid.
Yep. Yeah, something like that.
And so this girl did a thing, and she talked about the Fleetwood Mac, and I was like, wow, you sound so 19 right now, the Fleetwood Mac. And then of course I got up and did a presentation on Chuck Berry and explained that, and then also threw in the fact that he was arrested for putting cameras in the women's. I was like, hey, he's not always. Danny Brown says Apple did kind of miss the room with that app. Yeah, it was one of those where I was like, because usually, and this is one thing that you can learn from Apple. So many people. Tom Webster had an article out a while back ago that said we need to come up with a better way of describing our podcast, because so many times I see so many people like get into the schedule. It comes out every Wednesday and Thursday. Like, I'm pretty sure it's like, well, I would have listened to it if it came out on Tuesday and Friday, but Wednesday, like, that's not a feature, or that's not a benefit. That's I guess a feature, and so what you want to do is sell the benefit. And so one of, like, if you, a great it was a Christmas ad, and you see this guy, this little kid taking videos throughout Christmas. And then at the end, he's used iMovie or whatever to make this video that he then shows on the TV. And I think he had some old videos of grandma, and everybody's crying at the end. But it was Apple's great on like, look what you can do with this. Not so much, hey, it's got the new M4 chip and a blah, blah, blah processor. It was like, look what it can do. And people go, well, I want to do that. And so they go out and buy it. And this one was just more like the big feature of it was what? It's thin. Okay, because I was going to use it before, but it was too thick. I'm like, it's like the whole, the new phone has a titanium case. I'm like, well, who is throwing their phone off of a cliff? Like, is that really a feature that we needed? I'm like, it's still got a glass front. And as far as I know, that's the part that breaks. Like, if you can make some sort of unbreakable glass, that would be a feature I would want. So, yeah, sometimes we get a little lost with our advertising. When you can explain the benefits, and if it's a benefit people want, because to me, oh, it's a thinner iPad, that's not going to really make me want to, and I'm sure it's, what, buy one, get one free? Oh, no, wait, it's Apple. It's going to be at least probably, $800-900. I'm not sure what the price tag is on that. So,
I don't know who's still buying iPads.
That's it.
Because
you can do it all on your phone, and
yeah. Apparently they still are. I mean, apparently they're still, I think they're in schools and some of those kinds of things, but it's been a while since I've seen iPads in the wild. I remember when they kind of first came out, they're super popular. Everybody was buying them, had to have an iPad. All the friends that I worked with had to have them. And you go to events, kids events, kind of thing. You got one there?
I got one. This is like, I think version 2.
Does it still turn on?
It will turn on, but I have to charge it first and then read very fast because the battery does not last long.
Yeah. Well, but remember, there were pictures of you'd be at an event with kids, and all the moms and dads would have the iPads taking pictures with the. It's like, maybe that's been replaced with this now of taking, because the pictures are so good off this, but those were bonkers. Those times were bonkers.
Oh, just Google Katy Perry live and watch the audience, because nobody's actually enjoying the concert. They're all filming it so they can watch the concert with really bad audio later. I'm like, So
we have in the Collison house, we have a saying, we Walter Mitty it. Now, if you remember the movie Walter Mitty, he tries to live, or the point of the movie is to live in the moment. And so sometimes we go to things intentionally and don't bring out the phones and don't take pictures, because we just want to experience it in its fullness, like just Walter Mitty it. And I was one better than the other? I don't know, but sometimes just to sit there with your own eyes, not worried about the camera or the sound or whatever.
Yeah. Do I need to zoom in? Is it in focus? Is it, just experience it.
Something about just sitting there, taking a deep breath, bringing it in through your own eyes, and then just remembering that moment that's here.
Yeah. Give yourself a brain tattoo, man. Just put that memory in there. That's what my friend calls it. Randy says, my 15-year-old loves Queen, Journey, the Eagles. Well, that's because he has you as a dad. You have a cool dad. John Parker says a big resurgence with Fleetwood Mac is because of the skateboarding, Ocean Spray. There was a commercial that had that. Also, a lot of hard rock bands have covered the song The Chain, which it works really. If you want to make a nice heavy, if you don't love me, now it's like, bang, bang. It's like, okay, that's cool. So when I think of Phil Collins, I think of those two kids who hear his famous drum riff for the first time. Yep. Yeah. My youngest son is way into the 70s jam, says Chris from castahead.net, thanks to the Guardians of the Galaxy. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, that brought back a lot of that era.
Yeah. Who's buying the new iPad? Ralph is from AskRalphPodcast.com. There you go. Yeah, I could see that. Gary says I've watched videos in bed with it. Yep, that's a good use of an iPad. Because I know when I watch Netflix on my phone, it's kind of like, all right, I'm getting the content, but it's kind of not the same. He says the screen is much better on the iPad as compared to the phone. Yeah, it is. So, and wait.
Well, maybe.
Yeah, and Randy, Randy works in IT. He says iPads outsell Macs 3-1.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, for sure. But Macs don't sell. Listen, Macs are still a boutique. They're not mainstream. These Mac Minis that you and I have, I mean, yes, there are people who buy them, but they're not necessarily mainstream. It's not like a PC. And PCs aren't mainstream anymore. Everybody's doing stuff off their phones. So, I mean, PC sales are way down. PCs still rule the earth, though. Let's just be really clear about that.
Yeah.
Organizations buy PCs for now. I think most of them, the desktop is dead for the most part. I think most companies are just buying laptops for everybody now.
Yeah.
I think most, not every. I'm sure there's exceptions.
Right.
I look forward to your emails.
Chris says they've lowered the price of the 9th generation iPad to $240. So it's worth having an appliance connected around the house, such as kitchen, family.
That's at that price point, it's worth having on the kitchen table for those kinds of things.
And right now, Jim, we are on Rich Graham's iPad as we talk.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah,
very slow.
Yeah.
Oh no, this very show. I thought it said very slow.
Right.
Sorry.
Yeah. And then Dan says, again, from based on a true story podcast.com, I found in many cases I experienced the moment a lot better when I'm capturing it instead of just watching it. I think there's a part, I think that's FOMO, because you want to like later go, man, I should have recorded that. So I could see, but I would do that. I would like somehow point my phone at the thing, kind of do a quick, and then go back to just watching through my eyes. I haven't been to a concert in forever anyway, because I can't, I mean, the tickets are, you're going to shell out $200 easy by the time you throw in parking and a t-shirt. It's crazy. And then Jeff says, I use my iPad every morning to consume content and read. I think that's it. Reading, watching movies, things like that. So there you go.
And it would make sense. This audience is going to be more Mac than anything. And somebody in chat, I think Ralph said, they're all over college campuses, and that's true. But the Mac only represents at best 16% of the computing space.
Yeah,
at best 16%. So it is among tech enthusiasts, among podcasters, maybe college students. But I tell you, it's in the corporate space, it's tiny. Although, 15, 16, even 20%, that's probably not tiny. It's a good chunk, right? It's a fifth of the space. But the Mac itself, when I think about just the computer itself. Now, if you add iPhone and iPad to that, the whole world changes at that point. But a 16% share of the U.S. personal computing market, I would not consider mainstream. That's that's what I think.
DR says Apple schmapple.
It's a great device. I think for podcasters, it's one of the best devices. When you think about all the things that we have to do as podcasters, which is record, edit, render, publish, those things. Hands down, I think a Mac does it way better than a PC does. And so I think it's just better designed for that. So for podcasters, I say it all the time. I think, now you and I have both. I'm running a Mac. What we're on right now is a Mac, but I have a PC that I use for non-Mac things. Like there's sometimes it doesn't have to be either or, by the way. You don't have to just have one. You could have both. You could do both. These wars between these marketing wars that were artificially generated, combat zones for us to try to decide between, Mac, PC, all those commercials. That's just marketing. Like you can have both. You can use both. They both have a place, and one is not necessarily always better than the other. Your mileage might vary. Engage your brain. Use what you find is best, and whatever that is, use it.
And we're getting all sorts of tips today. Wait till the day of the show to buy tickets because people dump their tickets like 24 hours before.
Sometimes.
And Jeff has a great point. He goes, I don't go to concerts. I can't stand them because I didn't pay a lot of money to have somebody sing off key behind me. That's annoying.
Oh, yeah. That's a Taylor Swift concert right there.
I was embarrassed for a large part of the play Wicked because my ex-wife and my stepdaughter loved that. They played the soundtrack like to death. And we're in Wicked. It's a play. Like, we will be shushed if you don't stop singing. But they both had great voices, but nonetheless, like, please quit singing, you know? And they're just looking at me like I'm a curmudgeon. And I'm like, no, I'm pretty sure the people in front of you want to hear the people on stage singing. And that was,
I watched a video of the Taylor Swift concert in Sydney, I think, or Melbourne, one of those
Yeah.
two. I forget. I think it was Melbourne, maybe. And it was some record-setting crowd or whatever. And
right.
it was from a phone, obviously, someone was
Right.
recording it. And all the people, we'll just say that, all the people around this phone are singing. And it is just like you can't
Right.
even hear it. You can't even hear Taylor. And it is some of the worst sing. I mean, they are literally shouting
Right.
at this, and it's great. Listen, that's their concert experience. I'm sure it's great, but then don't post that video to YouTube because it was just like it was
bad,
cringy. It was. Listen, I'm an old guy trying to. I want to see what these concerts are like. Don't sing into the microphone.
Yeah, my favorite. Going back to Apple.
Yeah.
What happens is you buy one device, right? And you're like, okay. And then was it gonna be a Fitbit or do I buy an Apple Watch? And Fitbit lost all my data. Like, they literally just like, sorry. And I'm like, can I get a backup? And they're like, nope. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to an iWatch then. So I bought my iWatch, and the first time I went to log in to Podcast Connect, and I could type in the number, or I could just double click on my watch, I went, oh, this is worth every penny. It's so stupid, right? Or if I'm listening to podcast and I got my phone in my pocket and I want to pause or something, I can do it on my watch if I'm riding my bike. So that's where you start to see, like, I love the fact that I went to post my pictures from Content Entrepreneur Expo that I was at this week, and I could just airdrop my pictures to my Mac Mini and then post them there, because I hate trying to see which photo is which on the phone. And so when you get multiple Apple devices is when you go, oh, and that's why they have, if you think about it, Apple people are super loyal. You know, if they like on a PC, yeah, with PC, I could have an HP, I could have a Dell, I could have whatever. They all do the same thing. It's just like, which is the cheapest one? What can I get? How much hardware can I get for this much money? And then you don't really care. With Apple, and they've been smart with that. I don't know if they've ever, has there ever been an Apple clone? Like, is somebody bought?
Oh, I'm sure. Well, not recently, because they make so much money. They have 10 million lawyers, and if you even get close to them, you know,
right.
it's hard to forget or easy to remember. One of those two. There was a day that Apple almost was not anymore, and Microsoft infused Microsoft infused a bunch of money into them to keep them alive, because Microsoft was in the middle of some antitrust problems. Like the U.S. government and the EU are getting ready to try to break them up, right? And so they were like, well, here, Apple, here's a bunch of money. We also have to remember they fired Steve Jobs the first time.
Yeah, that's what Dan says.
You know, right? You know, you're like, it's not as clean. I think, you know, the phone space has also gotten this way with iPhone versus Android, right? And again, each one of those operating systems has their purpose. I carried an Android phone for a lot of years, and it just would heat up to the temperature of the sun, and it was just never really worked well for me. I got the iPhone, and it just worked, and I was like, good, it works for me. Now I use for home automation stuff. I prefer Android, one, because I can get it. If I'm using it solely for that purpose, I can get a iPad or I can get a tablet for a fifth of the price as I would put it on an iPad. So if I was going to take an iPad and mount it somewhere so it had some home automation monitoring, so to speak, right? Which is Android's really good for this. Why pay iPad prices for something that I'm not going to use in that way? Android works great. I got a little tablet, whatever the Walmart brand is, On or Ohm or whatever it is, right? I bought one of those for $79. It works perfectly for that case. So I always like to think, don't listen, brand is great. It's great, right? Most of the reasons brand is so strong is because of marketing, but use the tool that's best for you, that works in that. And you know, in some cases it's going to be different than what other people say, but use the one that works for you.
Right. Danny says from Captivate, I prefer the choice of not being locked into any ecosystem. I love my Mac, But apart from that, I'm good with using multiple options for the
For sure.
benefit they offer. Yeah, I mean, I have both like you have. That way, if somebody, for me, I need it in case the customer's like, I'm using something that only works on a PC. Well, I've got to have a PC to troubleshoot that. Brad said I was at one of the last Kiss concerts, and yeah, it was kind of pricey. And of course, they're not going to be cartoon characters or whatever in the future. I love that. It's like, you're never going to see us again unless we do this. I'm like, okay.
Okay, Eagles.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Well, and they got busted. Don Henley got busted lip syncing. That's not good when you're paying $100 a ticket. Rich says years ago they had Apple clones, power something or whatever. And then, SP says Apple clones exist in non-Western world countries. So, get your knockoff in, Kazakhstan or something of that nature. So,
more likely India, but yeah.
So, anyway, let's, here's another question. This one is about getting clients from your podcast. And he says, I'm looking for help with my podcast, either a podcast manager who will help me get more clients from it. If I go this route, I clearly need someone who will increase my revenue to cover the cost of hiring them, or someone to help with marketing. Do you have any recommendations? And unfortunately, this was from, I think, Reddit or whatever, but if you want clients from your podcast, do a podcast about the thing you're trying to get clients on. Would seem to, Ralph is trying to get clients for his accounting business. He's not doing a show about NASCAR. You know what I mean? It's like, that would be, I think, step number one. Number two, make sure you let your audience know you do that kind of stuff. I've probably told this story before, but I helped a friend of mine launch a podcast, and I'd known her for about 6 months. She did her podcast for about 6 months. So I'd known her for about a year, and I'm like, how's the podcast going? And she's like, well, it's going good. The numbers are going up, but I'm not getting any speaking gigs. And I go, you do speaking gigs? I've known you for a year. I've never heard you talk about speaking gigs in person or on your podcast. And she said, I don't want to feel salesy. And I said, all you have to do is say something like, I was speaking to a bunch of kids in the Bronx this week, and this young man came up and asked me a question. And I thought, that'd be a good question for the podcast. I go, there, you just let your audience know that you do speaking. And so, I mean, you guys are trying to get customers from your shows over at Gallup. I mean, I'm assuming you have a call to action in there to buy the Strengths Finders book or something, right?
Yeah, mild ones. You know, want to remind everyone, I always say at the end of the show, want to remind everyone to take full advantage of all the resources we have available in Gallup Access. Head out to my.gallup.com. I don't actually ever say buy Clifton Strengths. That's something right. I'm not saying we de-emphasize it, but we want people to do it because they want to do it. I don't want to trick them or, it's just, it's a softer sell, so to speak. Right. And then I'll throw in, we have some, maybe we'll have some just in time, call to actions. We have a summit every summer that we do. Sometimes we're trying to emphasize there's the thumbs up. So yeah, I throw those in at the end. Follow us on any social, follow us on any social platform by searching for Clifton Strengths. We want to thank you for joining us today. So we keep it pretty mild on the CTAs for that, even though it's a business. We're hoping the content does what it should, which is inspire people to do whatever they need. Right? Again, we're not trying to necessarily prescribe you need to go buy this, but say, hey, what's your problems? I bet we have a solution for you.
Yeah. And then the other thing you can do, and you have to be careful with this one, is have guests who should be your clients. So if you're doing a show about your industry and you find out about this person and they can bring value to your audience, then you use basically the podcast as an icebreaker and you get to know them. And once the interview is over, you're like, oh, that was great. Thanks so much. Who are you using for this type of service? And they go, well, I'm not using anybody. And you go, oh, well, if you ever need help with that, that's something I do. And I've heard people do that. I've also heard people go, what I feel is a little, and this is where you have to go back to your, what's my why? But I've heard people like, they don't care if the guest brings any value at all. They could care less about the audience. They're just trying to get clients. And they're like, it's working. I'm getting people to come on my show. I pitch them hard and heavy at the end of the interview. Then I get the client. I could care less. Like, they almost don't need the podcast. The podcast is just giving them a reason to reach out and, get the ball rolling. And I'm kind of like, yeah, but what about the content for the audience? And they're like, I don't care. I'm making money. And I'm like, well, okay. I guess if that's your why, but I'm always prone to making sure the audience doesn't waste their time, or, but it is what it is. So the other thing I just saw, I pinned this, and I want to say thanks for Craig. Craig says, hey, thanks for episode 3 of the Your Podcast website. It really helped me. This is where I interviewed an actual designer, and he goes through, like we just talked about, knowing your why. And that's really it. When for years, when you went to the school of podcasting.com, it had the latest episodes. And I'm going to say probably 3 or 4 years ago, I switched it. Now, when you go to the school of podcasting.com, the front page is basically a sales page, trying to get you to sign up with a link to episodes at the top. So you have to ask yourself, am I a podcast that has a business, or a business that has a podcast? There's a great book called Story Brand by Don Miller. I think it's Don. It's something Miller. And Don, not Dan. Don Miller. And he talks about when you go to somebody's websites, if you look at it for, say, 10 seconds, maybe not even that, you should know what the website's about. You shouldn't have to go to the about page and things like that. And so thanks for listening, Craig. It's that was a good episode. Things too, like if you think about it, like, somebody goes to buy something, so they bust out their wallet and they get the credit card. On the thank you page or the success page, whatever the page it goes to after the credit card page goes through, make a video that says, hey, thanks so much for buying the yada, yada, yada. Hey, I just want to let you know, while you're here, I have a special deal on such and such. Like on the School of Podcasting, I started this about 6 months ago, where when you sign up for the School of Podcasting, it's like, oh, by the way, I've got a deal where you can get $5 off my book, and it'll be signed. And I've sold more books that way than I have just from the website. Because why? Because the credit card is in their hand. And so a lot of great little tips that it wasn't like, here's a new thing to do. I mean, it's new because you're not doing it, but you just heard it and went, oh, yeah, that makes sense. And so it's I'm having fun with that show. I just started it, and I'll be talking about that on the School of Podcasting, because I'm measuring the crap out of it. Because, when people go, I'd love to have a 25% growth. Well, when you start off with 20, 25% of that is like 1. So it gets kind of crazy that way. But speaking of being thankful, I should say thanks to our awesome supporters. You can be an awesome supporter like Jody. Jody's awesome. Again, if we go over to, let me do this real quick. You should be an awesome supporter like Jody over at voiceoversandvocals.com. And I just realized that in a minute we're going to have to do the wheel of names, and
Yes.
I forgot to add Jody. So you'll get to see how to add somebody to the wheel of names, because I just dawned on me. I'm like, oh, I didn't update that. Can I not go to the next? There we go. And this show is brought to you by, speaking of the School of Podcasting, you can save by using the coupon code COACH when you go over there, and you get access to the courses, the unlimited coaching, and of course the awesome community. And if you're worried about that, there's a 30-day money-back guarantee. And Ask the Podcast Coach runs on Podpage. If you want to check out Podpage, go to trypodpage.com. That's my affiliate link. Or if you want to learn it, you can go to learnpodpage.com. That's a free course I have. And right now I'm using Ecamm. It's a great tool for live streaming and making tutorials in my case. If you go to askthepodcastcoach.com/ecamm, and that's ECAMM, because it's so good. And if you need more Jim Collison, and who doesn't, let's face it, check him out over at theaverageguy.tv. And it's time for the wheel of names. And
Yes.
it's so easy to do. If I can get the 8 million Ecamm windows out of my face here, I'm just going to write her name in. Jody, I will add your artwork next week. It just dawned on me. But I will just go here and put in, I'll press enter, and we will put in voice. What was her voiceovers and vocals? And vocals.com. And in theory, if I press enter, she should show up on
Yep, the blue one coming up to
the
the
blue
top.
one. There we go.
Yep. Yep.
Beautiful. Voiceovers and vocals.com. We'll do a little shuffle. Could she get, beginner's luck
Now it's
here?
red. Now it's red. Here we go.
Oh, now it's red. Well, that's interesting. And
it must pick a random color.
It is. No, seriously, it is. The luckiest guys ever. Radio Free Pro Wrestling. Man. I think this is their third week. They've won a lot. And so if you're into pro wrestling and, you want to watch people smash chairs and all that other fun, snapping into a Slim Jim, that's really dated at this point. You can check it out over at Radio Free Pro Wrestling. And I'll put a link to that in the show notes. So everyone over there, you know what? And that's a great example just of a niche, right? And if you want to check out that stuff, well, there's a podcast for that. So thank you so much for your support. You can be an awesome supporter by going over to askthepodcastcoach.com/support. And you're like, well, why would I do that? Well, maybe I saved you some time or money or some headaches. Maybe I keep you educated. Maybe it's just so doggone entertaining. And where else are you going to sit there and talk about Phil Collins for a while?
For sure.
Then go over to askthepodcastcoach.com.
Studio.
That's it. And I'm going to see if I can do this because I see you got your screen. I'm going to try to just, if I click on solo, does this just get rid of us? No, it does not. Let me drag this over here so I have to undo the scene because we're show all, unlock current scene. There we go. Now can I add this over on top of us? No. Can I drag it on top of us? Well, I can drag it on top of me. That'll work.
You. There you go. While you're talking about a couple weeks ago, I've always struggled with my lighting here in the studio. It's been okay. This is an area I need to still learn a lot about. But I wanted to try some of these new LED, or kind of the inexpensive diffused LED lights. And so I picked up I guess it was back in April now. Picked up a 2-pack of these. The brand name doesn't matter. They all come from China. They're all fairly inexpensive. These were $75, and I think Amazon right now is running. You get a $15 coupon with them if you choose them right now. I'll throw the link a little bit later in the chat. And but and they're not smart. In fact, you got to turn them on by hand. You got to go to the back.
What?
Yes. They do. Amazing, isn't it? They do come with a 8,000 milliamp hour battery in each one of them, and they're 20 watts. So they pull a little power. They're USB power. We talked a little bit about this last night or a couple nights ago on Home Gadget Geeks, but 20 watts for USB is a lot. And if you don't plug in the right adapter, it does not come with a 20-watt adapter. But if you don't have the right adapter for it, they can get a little hot when you're pulling this in. But what I liked about them is they're easily tunable. I don't have to have an app to tune them. If you look,
nice.
Took it off the screen. But if you look on screen, on the back of the device are two knobs, one for brightness, the other one for temperature. Let's say somewhere between 2,000 and 8,000, I think, or 3,000 and 6,000, something along those lines. Well, it says it right here, 2,500 and 8,500. It says it right on the website. And it gives me the ability to kind of tune these in to see what kind of lighting I get. And then, of course, I have to go into the app on the Mac and tune that as well. And I've been going back and forth on that. Last week, my color was a little washed out, I think a little bit better today. But I basically just put them behind. I have umbrellas up here that diffuse the light, and I just put them behind those umbrellas. And you could use them without umbrellas. They're supposed to be diffused that way. But it lighting is one of those things. I think I paid $50 by the time we were done for these. Lighting is one of those kinds of things I think used to be super expensive.
Yeah.
Now, not so much. Cast Ahead's asking no clicker. Nope. No clicker on this. Nothing. It is literally, I go behind them and just turn them on. And then with the battery part, it's nice. They're constantly charging. If I did lose power here, they would stay on for a certain period of time. You can do power pass through like I'm doing now, where I turn them on. I'm using them. Yes, it's pulling from the battery, but it's also recharging the battery at the same time.
Oh, nice.
The battery is kind of nice. You could take them with you if you wanted to take them off your desk. They've got desk mounts that come with it. Take them off the desk and set them up somewhere else if you needed to do some remote lighting. They are, and I haven't taken them on the road, but they look very, very durable. So you could, the light bulbs. I broke a few bulbs back in the day, hauling lighting equipment around. Of course, with LED, you're not having to do that anymore. So just encourage you, if you're working on some lighting, or if you need some lighting, there's some fairly inexpensive options for you out there. I think we're to the point where in the early days, some of this lighting, now I've been testing it for 3 or 4 weeks, so it's not that long. I don't know how the durability of it's going to be, but now may be a good time if you're struggling with your lighting, or you need some additional lighting, or you want to do something more. I think now is a good time to give it a try, and you can do it for not a lot. And the more you pay, the more features you're going to get. Some of them will come with a remote control. They're super cheap remote controls, by the way. Some of them will have an app. Your mileage might vary, so you can take it as you need it. But so far so good, and I've enjoyed the tuning aspect of them, and it kind of helps me kind of figure out what do I want. I have them at 75% brightness, 3800K for the lighting, and then I've kind of tuned the app here on the Mac to try and get it. Again, this is an area Dave, I still need to learn on, is to get lighting right. Sound is easier than lighting for me, for sure. So check that out again. I'll throw the link out in the chat room here if you guys want to look at it.
Yeah, it's tricky. That's the only remote way I have any kind of skin tone. It's through the lighting, and then the Elgato whatever cam link whatever lets me change my tint, so I'm not quite blinding everyone with the light off my forehead. That comes in handy. And lighting it's one of those things that, you look at a camera and you think, oh, I've got to spend thousands on a camera. And it's like, if you have decent lighting in your phone, you can you'll be right in the ballpark. Chris says, if you don't have room in your studio, get lights and cameras off your desk, stands, etc., desk clamps. It prevents the lens wobble. Yeah, I still have that. If I watch what I'm doing here and just kind of wobble my desk, you have to be careful because it looks like a bad version of Star Trek.
My desk is pretty sturdy.
Yeah.
Mine
rises and lowers. And so my lights are now in the ceiling. I have one of those poles that goes across, and I mounted them there. And I do like that. I can actually now open my window without tiptoeing and around the stand. You feel like you're in the Matrix or one of those Tom Cruise movies where you're going through the lasers trying to make sure you don't accidentally bump the wrong thing. That's always fun. And so, yeah, I remember
when that was a big deal in all the movies.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it seemed for a while all the movies were dancing around lasers.
Yeah. Makes for a great visual, but yeah. Yeah, and Danny says I can never quite
get your lights high too. Get your lights up high.
Yeah, because
especially if you wear glasses.
Yeah, because that's I really have to look way up to get any kind of reflection in my glasses. So yeah, or just do your podcast blind. Either one is has its challenges.
I would be lost without glasses on. Sometimes I've been in studios where they're like, "Hey, can you tilt your glasses up just a little bit to get art?" Because they'll just run them directly at me, and I'm like, guys, I gotta see. Like, I can't. No, that looks dumb on the camera. Put your lights up higher. For people with glasses, just put your lights up higher.
Yeah, Gary says I got a couple of LED panels in the ceiling. The wife loves it. Yeah, I bet. Hey, I was at Content Entrepreneur Expo in Cleveland this week, and it was fun. And I noticed two things, and I thought I got to start putting these into my interviews. Number one, I met this guy named Jordash Johnson, and what was fun is in my brain, I go, remember, his name is a brand. That's his actual name. And I almost later called him Versace. I was like, wait, nope, it's like, and then somebody said, no, just remember DoorDash. It's Jordash Johnson.
But they shouldn't call him Levi,
Yeah.
Levi's. Hey, Levi's.
But the fun part was he's really into AI. And I asked him like one question, and he just lit up. Like just asking him about AI, and he just went on and on and on and on. And that was interesting. And then I asked him, like, what are your kind of pet peeves about AI? And that made him go even more. And so that might be something, if you're interviewing somebody about whatever your industry is or whatever, ask them like, what are your pet peeves? Because I thought about this. I'm like, number one, you're going to have that passion, like, I hate it when somebody does, such and such, which also then turns into kind of a learning, because they're going to explain what you should do instead of the pet peeve. And it also then gives them a chance to show their knowledge on why that's a bad idea or whatever it is. But it was funny because with Jordash, as I talked to him, about halfway through his answer, I almost quit listening to what he said, because I was just enjoying the fact that, wow, I just hit the magic. Like, all I had to do was say AI to this guy and he's off to the races, and he wasn't pimping or, kind of trying to promote his stuff. He was just like, oh, this, and you can do this, and then that. I'm doing this one tool. This tool does this. And I was like, wow, watch him, look at him go, and so that might be something I start working into interviews. I'm like, what's your pet? I did that with the episode that Craig was talking about. I asked the guy kind of what his pet peeves are, and he was talking about, different things that are, when it comes to websites and they're all just templates, or, you can actually now get a WordPress plugin that builds your website via AI. You answer some questions and it builds your website. And I'm like, it's better than nothing, but I don't know. Jim, do you have any pet peeves or thoughts on this?
I'd listen for pet peeves in there. That would be another, like, you may, because that question, I would definitely prep them for it if you were going to ask it, because you don't want to get that off the wall, well, tell me what do you really, what don't you like? What are your pet peeves? Then somebody's like, I got to think about, that may not make the best if you're live or whatever. So you might want to let them know you're doing that, or just listen for it. You'll hear, I've interviewed quite a few, I interview tech guys on Home Gadget Geeks, and you'll hear those pet peeves in the interview, and then you'll be like, oh, they really don't like this. Right. Then you can ask, or they really like this. It doesn't have to necessarily be a negative thing. Sometimes you can hear that excitement in their voice about something you didn't ask them about. Write it down and come back to it, or go right to it. Hey, I heard you say, and call it out. Hey, I heard you say this. Tell me more about that. And they'll just take off. They'll run. It's like when you do the what's my segment?
Yes,
get my nerd on. Yeah,
yes,
get my nerd on.
Yeah.
So I get geared up for that, and I get excited when those kinds of things come up. So just listen for them. Just you do that pretty well. And it's going to be Jim needs to get his nerd on this one. And
that's it. Yeah. Dan says, I like phrasing it, what keeps you up at night about blah, blah, blah.
That's a good one.
Another way of doing that. Yeah, that's always fun. The other thing, Craig had a question. Do you know how Podpage handles pretty links? Can they be mapped to old links created by the WordPress plugin? I reached out to Podpage, but I didn't get a clear answer. What you want to do is go into pretty links and export them as a CSV, and then contact their support. This isn't going to happen overnight, but I know at one point I was going to move the School of Podcasting to Podpage, and I just don't think I've got 18 years of caca back there, and it's not so much a no. Right now it's a not now, and I need to see how they are building a front like sales funnel. Like that's not really their jam, and I'll have to see how that works. Because the one thing that I just thought about that I've never had on the School of Podcasting that I'm looking into is where you have a comparison chart. How does the School of Podcasting compare to Podcaster's Paradise, and how, whatever Pat Flynn's thing is, and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, that's a great idea. I've never done that. And I'm not sure how, because you kind of need a table for that. And I'm not sure, I think you can do that in Podpage. But anyway, that's a really long tangent to say I had exported all of my pretty links, and I reached out and said, hey, can we import these into that? And they were able to do it. So, so if you're looking to move over, that can be something to do. My other alternative would be to use some sort of, I forget what I use. What's the page? There's the guy looks like he's 14. ClickFunnels. You could have some sort of ClickFunnels to have the sales page and then have it go to that, and then have the School of Podcasting be something else. If I needed a front page sales funnel, you could always do that. And we got 5 minutes. We have to end a little early today because I'm doing a game show at noon, and it didn't dawn on me that I was like, oh wait, I go till noon. So let me grab one other question here that came up. We talked about video. We did that one. And this is just a classic. I was like, yeah, we could bring out the classic. We do talk about this one fairly enough. I produce an interview show, and my host has a good quality mic, but you guessed it. You want to guess who doesn't have a good quality mic, Jim?
The host? Or
The
the guest?
The guest, yeah. They were like, what do you do with this? And so, and it's the same stuff, reverb, et cetera, et cetera. So either A, and what I always do now is if somebody says, and I think they're a good fit for the show, can you give me a link to an interview you've previously done or two? And then I listen to their audio. And as soon as I hear that they sound awful, I will say, I'll email them and I'm like, have you gotten a different mic since this interview? This sounds rather boomy. And if they go no, then I go, here's a link to the Samson Q2U. If you want to be on my show, it's not. And you always spin this as I like that interview. And I want to make sure that people hear your story and your message and everything else. You are amazing, but my audience is going to tune out if you just show up sounding like that. So that's just, and in some cases, like Jim, you've interviewed some pretty big names, and sometimes you don't have a whole lot of choice. It's like, well, you get this person and they're calling in on their phone and you're like, that is better than nothing, so.
Yeah. Sometimes they think they're better than they are. That, they're like, oh no, everybody tells me this is great. And I'm like, okay, tap on your mic for me. Cause that's the very first thing I ask them. Just tap on your mic. And oftentimes they're not on that, so like, oh, you're not even on. Okay. It's because you're not even on the mic. Let's get in your settings. Let's figure this out. And then the mic will kick over. And then they're like, is that better? And I always break their hearts when I go, no, not really. Shoot. Okay, let's figure out some things we can do to get the mic closer to you. Or do you have a headset? Like, because I'm sure you bought one during the pandemic that's in the drawer right in front of you that you put away thinking you never have to wear. I don't know why people are so afraid of those headsets. Put it on your ear. You got a microphone. You sound great. It's 99% of the time, it's better than any other mic that they have.
Right.
Put the freaking headset on. And it's like your hair is not that important. Like nobody's looking at your hair. They will disregard you if your sound is terrible.
Yeah.
So let's get your sound right and not worry so much about your hair.
Yeah. If your hair has a little bit of a weirdness to it, they won't care if the words coming out of their mouth can be heard and don't sound like they're in a fishbowl.
And if they're using one of these, this was really common pre-pandemic and in the early days, right? The microphone on a set of earbuds.
Yeah.
And, it always seemed like I'd get Mr. T on the interview who had 1,000 chains around his neck. And then every time they would move, it would, you'd get this.
Right. Yeah. I pity the fool. Yeah.
The whole interview. You're like, could you wear a few less necklaces?
Yeah.
Like so it was, or it was there. They try to hide it under the lapel of their jacket, or I'm like, it's fine. It's fine if it's okay. I was just doing a recording this week with someone, and they did everything they could to get the microphone out of the shot, and I was like, it's fine with the microphone in the shot. I don't know what. Oh, I don't like it. Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I guess that's fair, but it's fine. Just it's a microphone. People are expecting. They would rather hear you than hear. Or a microphone 1,000 miles away.
Yeah.
Like,
or as Gary says,
microphone?
Gary says I had a guy show up on a cell phone in an elevator. Yeah, that's not a bad idea at all. And Randy says his go-to now is pre-recording a test call. And that's not a bad idea because that also gets you, it's your first step of having kind of a chemistry with this person or not, and seeing if they can answer a question or not, things like that. So yeah, it's a classic question. We see it almost every week. And I was like, well, it's, there's the old thing that if you wanted to get a message to everybody in your church, you would have to preach that message 3 weeks in a row, because not everybody shows up every week. So,
listen, if they've contacted you to be on your show, they better have dynamite audio. Like there's no excuses there. Like they can't show up, they can't contact you and then show up without a good microphone.
Yeah.
You know,
Mr. T, you cannot, yeah.
No.
Well, there's a documentary on Netflix about We Are the World, and Cyndi Lauper had too many jangly things on, and they're like, "Yeah, can you take those off?" Because she's bouncing up to the microphone to sing, and it's like, zing, and they're like, "Yeah, it's not gonna work, Cindy. Thanks." You know, she's like, "Oh, it's me." And I'm like, "Yeah, it's that," and you know,
who produced that? Who was the producer of that?
It was Lionel Richie and Michael Jackson wrote it, and Quincy Jones was the producer.
Quincy Jones, yeah. Quincy had his hands full with that thing, right? You know, they'd ask a few to leave. Like, okay, if you're not, and a few left. They came and they came hammer, and Quincy was like, maybe it's time for you.
Well, and Al Jarreau, they had to have him record his part because he was just having way too much fun. And they're like, well, while Al can still stand, let's let him record his part. And then Waylon Jennings, I think, was the guy that came in with his cowboy hat. And when he realized, okay, this is going to take 3 or 4 hours, he was like, yeah, peace out. I'm out of here. So, yeah. But speaking of we're out of here, we're almost out of here. And so, Jim, what's coming up on theaverageguy.tv?
So on Home Gadget Geeks this week, we had the whole team from Home Tech, the Home Tech podcast at hometech.fm. And we talked about home automation, the challenges, and then maybe what's coming in the future. So a fun show. These guys were great. It's always great to have podcasters on, right? So they know what they're doing. And available right now, homegadgetgeeks.com.
Nice. On the School of Podcasting, I'll be sharing a little more about some of the things I learned at the Content Entrepreneur Expo, especially when it comes to how do I battle AC/DC syndrome, which is if I do the same thing, half my audience is going to love it because they're getting exactly what they wanted, and the other half of the audience is going to leave because it's the same old stuff. And so I learned some lessons on that from the guy BJ Novak, who was the temp on The Office. He was the closing keynote, and he had some really great points on that. So that'll be on the School of Podcasting. If you're listening to this later, you can go over to the website, askthepodcastcoach.com, and there's a little microphone down there. You can leave us a question, and we'll play it on the show here next week. Also, we need to say thank you to our awesome supporter, Jody Krangle, over at voiceoverandvocals.com. If you need her for some voiceover, you've heard her. It's amazing. Check her out again, voiceoverandvocals.com. She's got her podcast there as well. And we will be here next week with Ask the Podcast Coach. Thank you to the chat room. You guys are always rocking. If you haven't liked, subscribed, and ranged, whatever you do to the bell, that would be beneficial. Thanks to Dan over at basedonatruestorypodcast.com, and of course Mark at podcastbranding.co. Go start your podcast today. It's fun, and I'll look at Jim with the fireworks. Awesome. We'll see you next week with another episode of Ask the Podcast Coach.